All right. So we're going to talk about strategic pivots, something that's pretty close to my heart because a lot of my portfolio companies have been through them. And even myself, I've been through it myself as a founder. So I thought maybe we could start by talking through some companies that you guys all know. And I might tell you what the company started out as, and you have to tell me what the company is now. So first one's pretty easy. It's Bourbon, a very famous company today. It started out as a location sharing app, BURBN. Does anybody know what that company is today? Correct. It's Instagram. So Instagram became a photo sharing app, but actually it was a location sharing app that they allowed folks to add photos to. And they realized the photo part was more popular than the location sharing part. And they pivoted the business to this filters app called Instagram. All right. Another one. This one's kind of tough, actually. It's Cicada. And this is a education app that allows teachers to share short form video content on education. It's the app now known as TikTok. It actually started out as an education app. And so what happened was the founders built this product. They were educators. They started the product for teachers to teach their students various things in short form. And what happened was it accidentally caught on amongst people using it to do karaoke. And the founders realized that the app was getting a lot of popularity Thursday nights when there was this popular TV show called Carpool Karaoke. And they saw the videos and it was all karaoke, and they pivoted the app to what was Musical.ly, which then got bought by Douyin in China and became TikTok. So another pivot. Okay. So another one, Audio, podcasting platform. This came out a long time ago. Anyone know? Twitter. That's right. The founders all thought podcasting was the next new thing. And they launched a podcasting platform, but internally they built this microblogging platform to talk amongst themselves. What happened with the podcasting platform was Apple released their own podcasting platform. Audio was basically DOA, and they thought, okay, let's create this microblogging platform, Twitter. One is Tiny Speck, was a gaming company started by Stuart Butterfield. Does anybody know now? Slack. They had built an internal tool. They built Slack internally for themselves at the gaming company. Gaming company wasn't doing so hot. Some of their friends wanted the tool that they had built internally because they were all hyped about it. And they started selling it externally, and then ultimately became obviously a massive company. And then the last one is one closer to my heart in the fintech space. It was a company called Wallet, and it was a consumer business that helped you manage your finances. Anybody know this one? Wallet, the consumer company, didn't really take off that well and ultimately became Plaid. So they decided we're going to sell the same product to other companies, building companies like Wallet. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there that pivoting is not strange. Pivoting is not weird. You should not feel ashamed if your initial product doesn't work out. Many of the products that we use today were originally something else entirely. And so it's totally fine to pivot. And in fact, I think pivoting is really a sign of strength. So, the way to think about it is like along the way, you're building a product, you have some idea of what it is you want to build, some idea of the future vision that you want to see in the world. And then along the way, maybe you realize customers aren't aligning with that vision at some point. So then there's a question, how do you decide and when do you know the customers aren't aligning with that vision? Are you guys familiar with Rahul Vora, the CEO of Superhuman? He wrote this article in the first round review about how to find product market fit. How many of you guys read that article? Okay. We have a couple of people in the back. So I highly recommend reading that article. It's a great tool for finding product market fit. And the question is simple. It's ask your customers, how they would feel if they could no longer use the product. And if the response is not like overwhelmingly negative, and if it's not, oh, if this product didn't exist, my life would become a lot tougher, then you know you don't yet have product market fit. And a lot of times people think that they have product market fit because they're giving something away for free. So that's another thing I might challenge you with, is thinking about pricing. In my portfolio, I have a company called Albert. Started out as a personal finance manager, actually like Wallet, the original product that Plaid was. So this company, they were giving away a free product, help you manage your finances. And they actually didn't really have much monetization figured out. All of the metrics looked great. Like everybody was they had a lot of people signing up to try the product, but they realized, like, is this really critical? Like, do people really, really want this product? And the way that they decided to test that was actually charging their customers. And they did this when they were almost running out of money. So they were at the point where they were going to shut the company down. And they instead said, when customers logged into the app, they said, would you be willing to pay us for this service? And they had a slider. And the customers actually had to pay for the service. So you could pay $0 or you could pay up to $14 a month. And, the company was dying at this point. So it was like a last ditch effort. Let's see if our customers are willing to pay. And the customers actually overwhelmingly were willing to pay. Like 80% of their customers were willing to pay an average of $4. And so they realized, okay, customers actually do want this product. And oh, by the way, that revenue actually saved them. And that meant that they didn't have to die and actually were very quickly able to raise a round that saved the company. And today the company is a massive company, unicorn, et cetera. So I think one way to test if customers love your product is to charge them. So there's a couple other things that I think about a lot in pivots. One is I recommend trying to figure out as soon as possible. Usually when you raise a seed round, you have 18 months, maybe 24 months of runway. And if you figure it out too late, if you're at the end of your runway, it's going to be very difficult for you to survive and raise money. So what I like to say is, within the first 6 months or so after launching your product, you should know if there's a strong customer pull. And if you're feeling that customer pull, it's going to be palpable. People are going to be talking about it with their friends, and you're going to get a bunch of customers that way. Like you're going to see tweets about it. Investors are going to have heard about your company through their portfolio companies. So all that stuff is going to be happening. And if you're not feeling that immediately, you might need to pivot. And pivoting doesn't necessarily mean you change the business entirely from one thing to another. There are a lot of different ways to pivot. In the case of Albert, there was a small business model tweak, which was we moved from a free service to a paid service. That's one type of pivot. Other companies in a similar space, like we mentioned Plaid had built a similar product and pivoted to providing infrastructure that they had already built. So a lot of pivots are actually not wholesale changes like some of the ones we talked about earlier, but more smaller changes where you use the same product and sell to a different customer set. In fintech, it's very common for folks to start building a consumer product and realize that actually it might be better if you sell that product to banks, and banks can use that as a channel for their own customer acquisition. We see that quite frequently. So the other thing I want to talk about is, again, this pivoting early concept. What I mentioned is ideally in 6 months, you kind of know if the company, if you're feeling this market pull. If you don't feel it, it could also be that your product isn't quite there yet. You might have launched prematurely, and that definitely happens. But what I'd encourage you to do to figure that out is talk to your customers. There's never a bad time spent talking with customers. What you should be focused on if you feel like you don't have product market fit And even when you do, is just talk to customers as much as you can and understand if they don't like your product, what is it that they don't like about your product? And if they do like your product, what would they like to see you change? And I will say it's easy to get into a paralysis from this because you might talk to 10 different customers and it's like like that parable with the elephant. And like every customer tells you something different. But I do think overall, talking to customers and actually spending real time with them, having them go through your product helps you eliminate a lot of these problems and it might help you understand a pivot. And sometimes a customer might say, well, I like this, but what I really need is something different. And we have a company in our portfolio that had a huge pivot. They were selling a product to hospitals and they realized after spending a bunch of time implementing with these hospitals that the CIOs of these hospitals were actually telling them, this is great, but you know what would be even better? And they pivoted that product and now have had a lot of success and actually also went from a ACV in the tens of thousands of dollars to now an ACV, annual contract value, in some cases in the millions of dollars with a single customer. Truly incredible pivot. So the other thing to think about is when you do make a pivot, if it's a sharp pivot, you want to make sure that your team is on board. Like I've seen this happen. One thing we talked about was the idea of a fintech company pivoting from serving consumers to serving banks. Well, there's a big difference. And the team that helped you serve consumers may not be and probably isn't the same team that's going to help you sell into banks. Like you might have a bunch of great growth marketers that were helping you sell a product to consumers. Well, unfortunately, if you make that pivot, that team is probably less likely to be useful in your new company. As you do the pivot, I would, try to first get alignment from the management team and make sure that that's what you want to do. It's actually okay to start in a small way. So you can originally do a bunch of tests. So maybe you have that consumer app going, but you test selling into banks. And if you're feeling a stronger market pull from the banks, then go in that direction and also pivot the team that way. If you do a wholesale pivot, like it's important to get buy-in from the entire team. It can be a real morale killer for somebody to feel like they weren't heard in the process. One thing I'll say on that is besides getting the team bought in, you also need to pivot how you think about the company. And so your metrics need to change. I always encourage people to have a few North Star metrics that they're always tracking and always talking about. So like in the case of Mercury, it might be deposits and customers. So there are a bunch of KPIs you need to track as a company. And as you execute the pivot, those KPIs also need to change. So as a team, what I would do is talk to them about the pivot and as a team, define new benchmarks that align with the pivot so you can measure that success of the pivot accurately. And this could be this could still be the case while you're running the old business. If the pivot is a micro pivot while testing, you want to define what success looks like. The recap things I would say, pivot early because you have a limited runway. Within 6 months from launch, ideally you have a sense on whether things are working. Use customer feedback as your North Star. Continually talk to customers and get deep engagement with them. Don't just ask them questions. Try to actually sit next to them and talk to them, buy them a coffee. Make sure your team is aligned on the new direction. And remember, a lot of amazing companies pivoted. Pivoting can be the smartest thing you do as a company. And, the final thing I'll talk about is because I'm an investor, you might wonder, well, what will our investors think? And what I'll say is investors want you to succeed. That's the most important thing. I do think it's important to talk to investors along the way. They can be a great sounding board. They might have seen other types of pivots and other types of companies doing what you're trying to do. So again, I would involve customers, investors and your team along the way. Look, it's clear that to build a larger business, you're going to have to expand. You know that already. What I would say is when you feel like that market is saturated, I would say just try to find an adjacency. Your best next customer is going to be somebody who's doing something similar, has a similar need to your existing customer that loves the product. And just, I would say like make a list, like spend some time with your executive team, make a list of like 50 of who those customers are and get in front of them with the product, build a prototype or maybe it's existing product and just test what works. But it sounds like you can sell the same product to a different audience. You should define who that audience is. Yeah. So it's a good question. So the examples we gave, I mentioned Wallet turned into Plaid. That was serving consumers. Then they used the same technology to serve enterprise or infrastructure. And then the other example I gave was the company selling to hospitals, serving a narrow niche and then going broader. And in the case of the hospital, it really came from talking to their customers. They were, serving a niche. And then they asked that niche, like, how do I sell you more stuff? What are your other pain points? And that's when they learned, okay, we can build a broader product here. And then in the case of the wallet product, they just felt like they never got product market fit with consumers. And, for them, it was, they had built their own software on another technology, Yodlee. And they felt like Yodlee was not a good product. And so they said, okay, if we build it ourselves, we can sell that to other third parties who are building a product like ours. But it's hard to know which one is which. The only thing you could do is talk to consumers and ask if they have a bigger problem that you could solve. And then you'll know that horizontal might be a better option. That's a great question. And I'm happy you brought it up. I should have brought it up earlier. Most people say, let me keep that product going. I have some customers there. And then inevitably, 100% of the time, it's very annoying to keep that product going because it's never as easy as you think. Like things are always breaking. Customers always want help. And you're not focused on that product anymore. It's very important to stay focused. And so what I would recommend doing is if you do have consumers that love that product, try to sell that product or give it away to somebody else who could use that product. But I don't think it's useful to run two products typically. Almost never. There are tons of products that built massive wait lists and then had zero conversion from that wait list. So what I'll say is it's not the worst thing in the world to build a wait list, but expecting anything to come of it very rarely happens. I think it is useful to do some marketing and understand like what people resonate with and test marketing messages. But I can't tell you, 10% of your waitlist users should you be using the product. It just varies widely. And we've seen numbers from 0 to, 10%, but we haven't really seen much more than that. But I would urge you not to spend too much money in acquiring a waitlist customer. A waitlist customer is not a real customer.